Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
On October 22nd, 2025, President Donald Trump made a very important decision. He placed new and tough sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. These two companies together sell a huge amount of oil for Russia, about half of all its oil exports. This news was a big surprise for countries and financial markets worldwide. It was clear that a major shift was happening. This action by President Trump was a quick change from his earlier plans. For several months before, he had focused on using diplomacy and talks to try and end the conflict in Ukraine. Only 1 week before the sanctions, he had even announced a special meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest, Hungary. He had hoped for real progress. But then, President Trump suddenly canceled this planned summit. He explained that President Putin's position on ending the war had not truly changed. Russia continued its attacks on civilians in Ukraine and showed no real desire for a quick ceasefire. President Trump felt that continuing with the summit would not lead to a good outcome, so he stopped the meeting. Hours later, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, officially announced the sanctions. He said that President Putin's refusal to end the war meant that the U.S. Treasury had to act against the companies that fund Russia's war machine. These sanctions directly targeted the main source of income for Russia's military efforts. The impact was immediate. Global oil prices surged very quickly, rising by nearly 6% in just a few hours. This price increase happened as the markets understood that millions of barrels of Russian oil might no longer be easily bought or sold internationally. This made energy more expensive for many nations. At the same time, the European Union worked closely with the United States. They quickly approved their 19th package of sanctions against Russia. This new set of rules included a complete ban on Russian liquefied natural gas, or LNG, imports. It also aimed at Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers and added new financial punishments for banks and online money services that helped Russia get around earlier rules. These strong, coordinated actions showed that the international community was taking a firm stand. This moment signaled a big change in global politics and how countries would now deal with Russia, setting the stage for many important shifts to come. 2. New problems with friends. After February 2022, Russia needed to find new buyers for its oil and gas. Before this time, Russia sold a lot of energy to countries in Europe. But now it started selling more to countries in Asia. This move was very important for Russia's money. India and China became Russia's most important economic friends. By the year 2025, India bought a lot of oil from Russia. More than 1/3 of all the oil India used came from Russia. China also became Russia's biggest trading partner. These countries buying Russian oil helped Russia get money. This money was important for Russia to pay for its ongoing conflict in Ukraine. But then things changed fast. After the new U.S. sanctions were put in place by President Donald Trump in October 2025, India reacted quickly. Indian oil companies, including the country's largest one, said they would buy much less oil from Russia. Some even said they would stop buying Russian oil for a time. This was a big and surprising change, as India had bought a lot of Russian oil for a long time. China also made a big move. Chinese state oil companies said they would stop buying Russian oil that came by ship. This meant no more oil coming across the sea from Russia to China. However, oil still flowed to China through pipelines that run over land. Even with the pipelines still open, stopping sea deliveries was a serious step. Both India and China's decisions created a new and difficult problem for Moscow and Russia's economy. Russia was now struggling to sell its oil and make money from its closest friends. 3. Europe makes a big change. The European Union decided to make a big change. Working together with the United States, Europe approved its 19th package of sanctions against Russia. These new rules aimed to increase pressure on Russia's ability to fund its war efforts. A very important part of this package was a complete ban on Russian liquefied natural gas, or LNG. This ban will be fully in place by 2027. First, all short-term deals for LNG will end within 6 months. Then, longer-term contracts will stop by January 1, 2027. This plan moved faster than what Europe had first thought. It showed Europe's clear goal to stop depending on Russian fossil fuels. Europe also focused on Russia's shadow fleet. These are many ships that Russia uses to secretly move oil and avoid earlier sanctions. The new rules added 117 more vessels to a list. This made a total of 557 ships that now face strong restrictions. This makes it harder for Russia to sell its oil around the world. New financial sanctions were also part of Europe's plan. These rules targeted banks and online money platforms used to get around old restrictions. For the first time, cryptocurrency platforms were included. The developer of a widely used online coin linked to the Russian ruble was sanctioned. Also, the company in Kyrgyzstan that issues this online coin and a related large trading platform were put on the sanctions list. A cryptocurrency exchange in Paraguay, which helped Russia avoid rules, was also named. 5 banks in Central Asia were also hit with transaction bans. European officials stated that these banks supported Russia's war economy. Furthermore, the sanctions targeted some Chinese refineries and companies that helped Russia trade oil. For example, a Lukoil company called Litasco Middle East DMCC was sanctioned. Chinese firms like Liaoning Petrochemical, Shandong Yulong Petrochemical, and China Oil were also included. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, said these new measures would weaken Russia's economy even more. She believed the ban on LNG would be a big blow to Russia. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen added that stopping LNG imports was a key step for Europe to completely end its energy dependence on Russia. This coordinated action from Europe showed a firm, united stand against Russia. 4. India's new plan. India had become a very important buyer of Russian oil. After 2022, when Russia began selling oil at lower prices, India greatly increased its purchases. This was a big change, as Russia had previously been a small source of oil for India. By 2025, a large portion of India's total oil imports, more than one-third, came from Russia. This showed how deeply India's energy needs had become linked to Russian supplies. Indian companies could buy this cheap oil, refine it, and then sell the finished products for significant profit. It seemed like a smart business choice for India, helping its economy grow and providing energy security. However, the main economic reasons for buying so much Russian oil started to fade. By the middle of 2025, the special discounts Russia offered on its oil were not as big as before. This was partly because shipping became more efficient, and Russia had a stronger position in negotiations as Asian demand grew. The financial gain for India from buying Russian oil was becoming smaller. This change made Indian companies and the government start to think differently about their oil purchasing strategy. The clear economic benefit was not as strong as it once was. At the same time, India faced increasing political pressure from the United States. In August 2025, President Donald Trump introduced new taxes known as tariffs on goods imported from India. These tariffs added an extra 25% to the cost and had a serious impact on many Indian businesses. President Trump clearly stated that these measures were in response to India's actions, which he saw as undermining U.S. efforts to counter Russia. Despite this direct pressure, India continued to buy Russian oil at steady levels through September and even into early October. Market information from October 20th showed no signs of reductions in imports. But the situation changed quickly on October 22nd. The United States announced new and very strict sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. These companies supplied most of the Russian oil to India. These new sanctions created a perfect opportunity for India to adjust its policy. India could now explain its decision to reduce or stop Russian oil purchases as necessary compliance with new international rules, rather than as giving in to President Trump's earlier tariffs. This allowed Indian officials to maintain their strong image at home and also helped improve relations with Washington, especially with important trade talks coming soon. Major Indian oil refiners, including the country's biggest buyer, Reliance Industries, immediately announced plans for sharply cut imports. Experts quickly predicted that Russian oil imports to India would drop to near zero levels in the next few months. This fast and firm reaction from India marked a big change from its past actions. 5. China is careful. China reacted to the new U.S. sanctions carefully. On October 23, 2025, a spokesperson from China's foreign ministry, Guo Jiakun, stated that China did not agree with the U.S. sanctions. He said these actions lack legitimacy under international law. However, China's business actions showed a more practical approach. Major Chinese oil companies, including PetroChina and Sinopec, quickly decided to stop buying Russian oil that came by sea. This was a smart business decision to protect their own companies. If they continued to buy oil from sanctioned Russian firms, they could face new U.S. penalties. These secondary sanctions could seriously hurt China's economy. They could also affect China's access to the global U.S. dollar system, which is very important for international trade and finances. This move showed a clear difference in how China managed its oil imports from Russia. While they stopped sea shipments, which are easier to change or cancel, pipeline deliveries continued without interruption. Pipeline infrastructure needs long-term plans and cannot be stopped easily. This two-part approach was part of China's careful strategy. It allowed them to maintain some important energy ties with Russia. At the same time, China aimed to avoid direct conflict with Washington and the risk of harsh U.S. secondary sanctions. China and Russia are often seen as close partners, but their economic relationship has clear limits. China will not pay a very high price to support Moscow if it harms its own economy. Beijing had leveraged this difference, using Russia as a market for its exports, but keeping the flexibility to adjust when costs become too high. This careful balancing act was noticed by the United States. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated that President Donald Trump would address concerns regarding China's acquisition of Russian oil with President Xi Jinping soon. China needed to show it was taking these concerns seriously. By stopping seaborne oil, China hoped to show some compliance, protecting its crucial economic links with the West while still showing some support for Russia. This was a complex but necessary strategy for China. 6. A hard time for other countries. The new sanctions caused problems for many countries around the world, making them face hard choices. Turkey, for example, found itself in a very difficult spot. It bought a lot of its energy from Russia. In 2024, a large part of Turkey's oil imports came from Russia, and a significant amount of its natural gas also came from there. Russia had also helped Turkey with big projects, like building a nuclear power plant. This made Russia a very important trading partner for Turkey, almost its second biggest after China. However, the United States and European countries pushed Turkey to stop buying Russian energy. There was a real risk that Turkish businesses could face sanctions too if they continued to work with certain Russian companies. Turkey needed to balance its energy needs with its wish to keep good relations with Western countries. This was a challenging act for them to manage. Countries in Central Asia also felt new pressure because of the sanctions. Nations like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan are close to Russia and have strong business connections. In the past, some of these countries helped Russia get around earlier sanctions. But the new international rules made this much harder. The European Union even placed bans on 5 banks in Central Asia, saying these banks helped Russia's economy. This meant that Central Asian countries faced a clear choice: either keep helping Russia and risk problems with Western finances, or change their ways. It became more and more difficult for them to stay neutral. Even Russia's president showed his unhappiness with how some of these countries were developing ties with other global powers. Beyond these regions, many other developing countries, often called the Global South, had to reevaluate their choices. While some of these nations appreciated Russia's ideas and challenges to Western leadership, practical business interests often won out. For instance, Brazil is a large country and a member of the BRICS group with Russia. Yet, Brazil did not try to buy more Russian oil after India and China reduced their purchases. This was because Brazil's important exports, such as farm products, are mostly sold to the US and Europe. Losing these markets would be very bad for Brazil's economy. Similarly, many African countries found that even though Russia offered some military or economic help, access to Western financial systems and markets was far more important for their own growth. So, for most nations, maintaining strong economic ties with the West became a bigger priority than offering political support to Russia. 7. Russia has big problems. In October 2025, new sanctions hit Russia hard. The country's economy, focused on war, faced its hardest period. Russia's government budget was under great stress. Fuel shortages began in places like southern and far eastern Russia, and prices for fuel went up. Russia's oil revenues kept falling. By September 2025, money from oil products was the lowest in 5 years. The government spent $100 billion on its military in the first half of the year. But oil and gas money dropped by nearly 17%. The economy grew slowly, then shrank slightly in early 2025. This was the first shrinkage since mid-2022. Sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil worsened the situation. These companies sold about half of Russia's oil. Russia now had to sell its oil for much lower prices to find buyers. This greatly reduced income. It became harder for Russia to fund the war due to high costs and less money. Military losses were very high, and equipment was scarce. With many partners pulling back, Russia relied more on its few strong allies. North Korea became Russia's most trusted friend. By fall 2025, North Korea sent thousands of soldiers to fight for Russia and supplied many weapons. Their 2024 defense treaty made their bond very strong. Belarus also stayed a close ally, depending heavily on Russia. Serbia kept its strong ties with Russia despite outside pressure. Russia's power also weakened in its own neighborhood. In the South Caucasus, countries like Armenia and Azerbaijan began to move away. Armenia, a longtime friend, felt Russia did not help it enough against Azerbaijan. Because of this, Armenia left a Russian-led military alliance. It also stopped buying most weapons from Russia, choosing countries like India and France instead. Surveys showed less support for Russia among Armenians. Azerbaijan also faced issues with Russia, including a diplomatic crisis after a Russian missile mistakenly shot down an Azerbaijani plane. Both nations in the South Caucasus showed they would prioritize their own interests rather than always following Russia. This was a clear sign of Russia's shrinking influence. 8. The big question for the future. The new sanctions in October 2025, put in place by President Donald Trump and the European Union, had a very strong effect. India and China, who were major buyers of Russian oil, quickly decided to buy much less. Europe also moved to stop buying Russian gas entirely. This created big financial problems for Russia and made it harder to pay for its war. Many people wondered if these changes were permanent or just a temporary difficulty for Russia. There were several important things to consider for the future. First, how well would the new rules be enforced? The United States would need to truly make sure countries followed the sanctions. If not, Russia might still find ways to sell its oil and gas. Russia also used a shadow fleet of ships to move oil secretly, making enforcement harder. Without strong action, Russia could find ways around the rules. Second, Russia had often found new ways to get around sanctions in the past. It had built new trade routes and made new deals with countries like those in Central Asia and Turkey. Russia was good at finding other ways to sell its products and get what it needed for its military. So it was possible Russia would find new paths to avoid these latest rules too, especially if the pressure lessened over time. Third, what about political changes in the world? President Trump had suddenly become much tougher on Russia with these sanctions. But a change in leadership in America or other key countries could shift this approach. Changes in governments in India, China, or European nations could also change how strictly the sanctions were applied, either making them stronger or weaker. Fourth, the global oil market was important. If oil supplies stayed high and prices low, countries might not want to risk sanctions to buy Russian oil. But if there were shortages or prices went up a lot, some countries might try to buy Russian oil again, even with the risks involved. Finally, Russia's own stability under these economic pressures was not clear. Many soldiers had been lost in the war. The Russian economy had become focused on the military, taking money from other areas. People at home faced higher prices for goods and less fuel. This could cause unhappiness within Russia and make it harder for the government to rule. Overall, the events of October 2025 showed that Russia's global position was now much weaker. Key trading partners were stepping back, and it was harder for Russia to get the money needed for its military. This was a challenging moment for Russia, showing its deep economic problems. But it was not clear if these problems would truly stop Russia. It would depend on many things in the future. Do you think Russia can recover from this economic shock, or is this the beginning of the end for its war effort?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.